You elected to protect us, to protect our way of life. I ask every one of you to imagine the faces of your mothers as you look at mine, and ask yourself, is there nothing that we can do? Is there nothing that you personally are willing to do to stop the cancer of white supremacy and the domestic terrorism it inspires? Because if there is nothing, then, respectfully, senators, you should yield your positions of authority and influence to others that are willing to lead on this issue. The urgency of the moment demands no less. My mother's life mattered. My mother's life mattered. And your actions here today will tell us how much it matters to you.
Folks, that was Garnell Whitfield, the son of Ruth Whitfield, the oldest victim of the Buffalo massacre, sharing his testimony during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing today on Capitol Hill. It was called Examining the Metastasizing Domestic Terrorism Threat After the Buffalo Attack. Now, keep in mind, this is the same Senate that chose not to move forward on the bill passed in the House to deal with domestic terrorism. It was blocked by Republicans. The committee heard from family members and experts on the impact of domestic terrorism in the country. We're going to show you some more of that. We're joined though right now by Ben Crump, civil rights attorney, and Michelle Spight, who lost two relatives in the Buffalo mass shooting. She attended the hearing today. Actually, both of them, they certainly join us right now. I'm glad to have you here, Michelle. Certainly sorry for the loss that you and others experienced by what took place at the hands of this white domestic terrorist in Buffalo. I got to get your thoughts on listening to what many of the Republicans senators had to say in this hearing. It gave the impression that, again, they offered their thoughts and prayers, but in many ways, we're defending actions that could stop domestic terrorists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They did offer their, what they term as condolences, but the back end of that was a lot of deflecting. And I think it's really critical, or was actually critical today, that the family be present and that testimony did go forth from a family member so that they can see the vital necessity to keep the focus where it needs to be. And that is parked, quote unquote, at Tops. That is where this person just came and, massacred loved ones and just riveted the community. So yes, there was lots of deflection, more of that than there was sincere apologies in my terms.
There were family members who lost folks due to police violence, and you had Republicans, Senator Tim Scott, Senator Lindsey Graham, and others talking about doing something about it. They actually never did. And this shouldn't be the case. It should not be the responsibility of family members to continue to apply pressure on them. But we see this with other shootings, Parkland, for example, Sandy Hook, Columbine, where those family members are continuing to apply that pressure to force members of Congress to do something. Are you and others prepared for what could be a very long battle?
We certainly are taking this in stride, in addition to, the natural process of grieving. It has been therapeutic to many and to me personally to fuel that, that grief and some of that anger into something very purposeful. So we are very intentional with that respect. And yes, we are up for the long haul.
Ben, that question, look, is one that we have to confront. You represent a number of families, and the list only grows, having to continue to come to Washington, D.C., talking to the White House, talking to U.S. senators, talking to House members. The only way anything is going to get done when it comes to this fundamental issue is if there is massive public pressure that is put on the senators they're going to have to be, family members are going to have to be in their face constantly to force them to act.
Roland Martin, again, you're correct. You know Washington, D.C. probably better than most. And right now we had a gridlock with the Republicans in activity. One of the things I said in the press conference with Dick Durbin and Senator Rosenblum and Senator Chuck Schumer was, it was a sin how they killed the Buffalo 10, that monster. But it was also sinful that this Senate has failed to act. The previous administration removed the requirement for the Department of Justice to investigate and report out to the Justice Department in the White House on white supremacy. And Senator Dick Durbin said he believed even if that was in place, that could have had an effect on preventing this massacre. But you can't even get the Republicans to agree to a vote on this matter because they don't want to be on the record. And that's what Garnell Whitfield and Michelle and others said so eloquently and passionately, Roland Martin, is do something. What are you going to do about this? Our families' deaths won't be in vain.
Now, here were you and others, Michelle, raising this point. And this is what one of the things that Senator Ted Cruz of Texas wanted to focus on today.
I do think my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle try very hard to erase the history of the Klan, that it was formed by elected Democrats, that its leadership was almost entirely elected Democrats, that the authors of the Jim Crow laws were without exception elected Democrats.
Well, actually, those of us who know history already know all of that. But what's interesting, Michelle, is that that has nothing to do with what happened at Tops grocery store in Buffalo.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that is why we are very, like I said, very intentional, and we are very driven to make sure that, what happened at Tops on May 14th remains current and that we keep the focus where it is. We cannot change some of the, historical things that have happened in the past. But again, this is not a roll call for everything that went array previously. We need to keep the focus where it is. The focus is a white supremacist, very calculated and very concise, made a 180-page missive of how he was going to gun down and execute Black people who had no choice but to go to the only supermarket in this Black neighborhood that just so happens to reside in a food desert. We have to keep the focus that white supremacy is not something that came up yesterday or even started on May 14th. He, along with others, have been fed an appetite of hate. It has gone down throughout history, unprecedented of anything being done about it. And we're demanding accountability at this point, and we're not going to be silent until something's done.
I did find it interesting, though, Ben, that after Senator Ted Cruz said that, and Justin Herdman gave a response, that Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, who was actually sitting in the chair's position because Senator Dick Durbin had stepped out, she had a few words to say after what Senator Ted Cruz had to say. So I thought, Ben, this also was important to note.
Senator Durbin went to vote, and so I just want to start out by noting that the intelligence community has identified racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists as a category of people most likely to conduct mass casualty attacks. I think we have an agreement on that. But one thing that wasn't noticed, and this is just 1 year of statistics, but was not noted by Senator Cruz, and that is that the FBI reported that of the racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists it was investigating in 2020, so let me be very clear about the category, 87% were white supremacists. So I just think it's very important that the record reflect that. It's certainly not all of them, but it, at least for the recent year that we have data on, it was the majority of them. So,
And the reality being, Crump, they don't want to talk about that because many of them vote for folks like Ted Cruz.
Yeah, and you know, the expert panels at the hearing, they kept stressing about the race replacement theory and how Fox News continues to make this a legitimate news matter over and over again. And they said that is making it legitimate in people's minds. And so they continue to be, I guess, as the expert said, Roland Martin, they are promoted for espousing this racism, this hatred. And you have it with the politicians. They said get higher poll numbers amongst the Republicans when they say this evil, hateful rhetoric. And they said the news cable broadcasters get higher ratings. And they said that was the problem. And until we're going to deal with, we cannot celebrate intolerance. We cannot celebrate evil and hatred like the race replacement theory, then nothing is going to happen. And the irony of what Ted Cruz said, Roland Martin, was this. He talked about all these violent acts, and he named instances when black people were the culprit. And he ran through about 6 or 7 of them. But he never talked about the violent insurrection of January 6th that he continues to defend. And so it was just hypocrisy, and it was very agonizing sitting there watching him with all those family members like Michelle, who had their family members killed by young white supremacists, and he would not even address white supremacy.
Absolutely.
Michelle, go ahead.
Absolutely. And Senator Booker spoke to it and said it best, you know, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it's almost as if, you know, our country has grown to have an appetite for contempt and an appetite of insurrection. And it definitely is a threat to our democracy. And those are the things that we need to bring to the forefront. And I know they have been brought to the forefront previously, but those are the things we need to just keep driving home, because if we do not stop this in its tracks, you know, God forbid, I don't know what our democracy will be as we know it. So, you know, seemingly, as Mr. Crump has said, you know, Cruz never spoke to any of the insurrection. He never spoke to any of he never spoke to the group of Proud Boys and the propaganda that is promoted on these different media streams. And that really is at the seat of what is fueling, you know, the hatred and the anger and the bigotry. So we definitely have to take a look at that seriously, and we can't stop talking about it.
We can't, and we certainly will not on this show. Michelle and Ben Crump, I certainly appreciate both of you joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Nice attire.
Appreciate it, Doc. Appreciate it.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. New, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.